Welcome to the Timescales Interviews. I'm Greg, your host. Today we have a very special guest, the multi-talented filmmaker and author, Mr. John Walsh. How are you doing today, John?
I'm very well, Greg. It's great to be speaking to you across the pond, as they say.
Yeah, no doubt. This has been conducted in California and England. Am I correct that you are in England?
Yes, I'm in London.
Okay, very good. So what's it like there this afternoon?
It's a bit wet and a bit rainy, as people always expect in London. We've just had some snow, which was early for us this time of year, and it's been swept away by the rain, as most things are.
Okay, and it sounds like about the same here, except for the fact that we had an early morning earthquake. But since we were all asleep, we didn't feel it, and it was a couple of 100 miles north of here. So we have a lot of earthquakes here in California. It keeps us on our toes. So, folks, Mr. Walsh has a brand new book that came out in the United States today. It is titled Doctor Who and the Daleks: The Official Story of the Films. It has been released in hardcover and Kindle formats in the UK as well on December 5th, and it has a solid 5-star rating on the largest online booksellers. In the United States, this is currently the #1 new release in drama television books. Mr. Walsh, how excited are you today?
I'm very excited, Greg, because the book came out about a week ago in the UK, and on Amazon UK, it sold out on day one. So they ran out of supply day one, which it's going to sound arrogant, but it wasn't that much of a surprise, because the book, when it was first put on in March this year as a pre-order, completely sold out the amount that the publisher had planned. So they had to go back, release the book at a later date in end of November, early December. And so we're delighted with the response, and we're thrilled that we're #1 there in the US as well, because it's been a long time coming, this book, but it's finally here and people are ready to buy it. I suspect in more than one copy each. So people are buying it as presents to give to people, which is good news.
Okay, now I've purchased 2 copies myself. I purchased the hardcover, which is going to go on our coffee table, and then I also purchased the digital Kindle version, and that was delivered last night. In fact, Amazon shows it was delivered December 19th, and I've been reading that for the last couple of hours. I've been reading that since we got up this morning, and I am absolutely blown away by it. It is unbelievable. To me, it's obvious that it is a piece of missing history of these Doctor Who films that should have always existed, and it has not until now. Part of the synopsis says Doctor Who and the Daleks, the official story of the films, is the definitive guide to the making of the classic 1960s Doctor Who movies, lavishly illustrated and packed with insights into these beloved films. Would you say that that's accurate?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, it's everyone knows the brand of Doctor Who, but mostly from television. And of course, these films were made only 18 months after the first episodes aired of the very first series in 1963, November 63. So after 18 months of success on television, it transferred to cinema. At the time, the BBC wasn't sure whether or not it was going to be a long-running project. So it's fascinating that these films, which have kind of been forgotten by some people, but remembered by hardcore fans, are now back. They've been fully restored by the rights holder, Studio Canal. This book was made in collaboration with Studio Canal. This is my 3rd Studio Canal collaboration. And of course, they have the archive of the paperwork, the facts and figures, and of course, the stunning photography, much of which came from Canal, but lots of which came from fans. So as you page through there, Greg, you're going to find pictures that haven't been published before. So for fan obsessives like me of Doctor Who, they'll know which pictures they are, because they'll get very excited like I did when I was opening computer files and finding these pictures. I got very excited.
Wow, that's like opening a treasure chest of history there. As I went through it this morning, I've seen every page of it, and it occurred to me that I have not seen at least 95% or more of it. I only recognize several of the photos, and those would have been of memorabilia. Some of the books and things that came out back then. To me, in reading it, at a point, it felt like it actually took me back to the era of the late 1960s. I felt like I was back then when these films were being produced. It kind of, the book was kind of a little bit of a time travel experience for me, and I'm going to be spending the entire day on it. I'm going to read every single word of it, cover to cover, and I'm really looking forward to it. From what I have seen so far, it is absolutely outstanding. And we're going to come back to that book here in just a moment. But first, I would like to let people get a peek into who you are, Mr. Walsh, or John. I've seen that this is not your first rodeo when it comes to official stories of films. As you are a film expert, you have previously published Flash Gordon, the official story of the film, in 2020, Escape from New York, the official story of the film, in 2021, and Conan the Barbarian, the official story of the film, is coming out in 2023. I'm starting to see a pattern here. Is it a safe guess that you are going to continue this series of books of the unofficial stories of the films?
Yes, I am, Greg. And the one that you might have missed from your collection there, which isn't under the official story of the film's banner, but it's Harryhausen, The Lost Movies, the book that started it all for me. I'm a trustee of the Ray Harryhausen Foundation. I wrote a book all about Ray's unmade films. The publisher said, come and do some more with us. And I said, on Ray Harryhausen? And they said, well, what other film books are you interested in? And that led to those. I'm currently working on book number 6, which is also a lost movie, or rather an official story of the film's title. And there's a book number 7 being lined up for me with the publishers as we speak. So I've been back and forth with emails today on number 7. And because of the nature of these projects, I'm not allowed to kind of divulge, because I'm not the publisher and I'm not the licensor, I'm not the rights holder. I'm just the guy in the middle writing the book. So I have to be mindful of their commercial sensitivities around which books we're doing and so on. But yes, the next one is a quite well-known film as well. So it's blank, 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 the official story of the film.
Okay, let me see here. Somebody might be able to figure that out. So, okay, so your future works are being kept in a shroud of secrecy by the publishers.
I mean, that happened with Doctor Who. It happened with Escape from New York, and to some extent with Flash Gordon as well. I mean, it's difficult because you want to tell people about what you're doing and you're trying to get assets for the book. But the difficulty that publishers have at this level is it's difficult to stop people doing self-published books where they might do their own book on Doctor Who or Flash Gordon and so on. And although they won't be allowed to use the same photography, they might speak to the same actors. And what the effect will have is it can soften the release of your book. And this book is mighty expensive. It's an expensive book to buy. It's an enormously expensive book to produce, because the publisher is paying the rights holder, in this case Studio Canal, a license to reproduce their film in book form. So if someone goes under the radar and does it unofficially, it's a bit like selling a t-shirt at a concert that you've printed at home, and it's half the price and half the quality of the ones you could buy there in the stadium. And so part of it is commercial sensitivity. And sometimes my books coincide with a new 4K release, as in the case of Doctor Who. There was a 4K release here in the UK by Studio Canal, and within it there was a little preview of my book. Well, I couldn't tell people about the book in case it gave too much notice of the 4K release. Big companies like to get their ducks in a row, as it were, when it comes to commercial releasing, and it's all to do with different holidays of the year, to do with the Christmas market, the post-Christmas market, and so on. So it's an interesting machine to be inside of.
Wow, that's very interesting. I would like to see a book on that process.
Well, I think there's enough information to do one, yes.
Okay. Now, on Ray Harryhausen, in 2019, you released Harryhausen, The Lost Movies, based on Ray Harryhausen, who is known for 1 Million Years BC, Clash of the Titans, and Jason and the Argonauts, among other works. How did you meet Ray, and did you become friends with him?
Yes, I mean, I can probably show you a picture of me. Oh, there we go. So
Oh,
that was me when I was 18, and I was a student at the London Film School, looking very
mhm.
pale, as I always did, always wore black. And this is the Kraken, the original model of the Kraken from Clash of the Titans in Ray Harryhausen's house. And the little clapperboard there, I was making a documentary about Ray, his life and his work as part of my course at the London Film School, where I was a student. And the film I made was quite successful. And when I left film school, I started working professionally at a very young age. I was only 18 there at the time at the film school. And it's normally a post-grad course. So the other students at the school were in their mid-20s. And I was taken on because I was already kind of an accomplished filmmaker at a very young age. I've been making Super 8 films since I was around 8 or 9 years old. So
Wow.
Ray was fascinated by the commissioning process on television. He was more or less in retirement at this point. And so I kept in touch. In his big house in West London, he had his entire, or the vast majority of his collection from the films, all the creatures that we know and love. And so I kept in touch over the years. He kept tabs on what I was doing. If I was nominated for a BAFTA, or if he'd watch an award ceremony on TV, he'd drop me a note and say congratulations and so on. And we'd exchange kind of postcards or Christmas cards and so on. And then later on, when he formed the Ray and Diana Harryhausen Foundation, which is a charitable organization to protect and preserve his legacy and his collection, I was asked to join and become a trustee. And so in the last few years, I've been running things with Vanessa Harryhausen, Ray's daughter, and our collections manager, Connor Heaney. And between us, we've had books. Vanessa's had her own book out called Harryhausen, Titan of Cinema, my book on the Lost movies, a book on the movie posters by Richard Hollis, another good friend of the foundation.
I'm sorry, what was his name again?
Richard Hollis.
Okay.
He's a good friend of the foundation. He did Harryhausen, the movie posters book for us. We've had exhibitions all around the world, including in the National Gallery of Scotland. We're currently in talks with the George Lucas Museum and the Oscars Museum to bring the collection there. So I'm quite an active trustee of the Harryhausen Foundation. So it's for me as a trustee, it's an unpaid position, of course. But I'm very active with making sure that we protect Ray's legacy, that we're fully funded as we move forward, and that if merchandise is going to be created, that it's both official and of very high quality. And if you go onto our official channels, my channel, Walsh Bros on YouTube, or the Harryhausen Foundation channel on YouTube, you can see the unboxing videos we've been doing for high-end quality toys. And for people who are big Harryhausen fans, let me just show you this. I reckon, do you know what that is, Greg? Do you recognize that?
No, sir, I don't.
It's the heart of the Minotaur from Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger. So the giant gold man who's half bull, half man, that's his heart that's placed inside of him. And that's a reproduction made by Star Race Toys of the Minotaur heart. And if you're a Star Wars fan, there's a connection, because Minotaur, for some of the scenes, was played by an actor in a gold suit, a 7'3" actor, Peter Mayhew, who, as a result of being in Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger, was cast as Chewbacca in Star Wars.
Oh,
so
really?
We have lots of connections between Harryhausen and Star Wars universe. Of course, with Doctor Who, different Doctor Whos have appeared in Ray's films. And famously, and here's a wonderful Who connection for you, when I did my documentary there at the film school, it was shot on 16mm film. You can find a clip of it on my website and on the Foundation's website. It's narrated by a certain British actor, Tom Baker. Now, Tom Baker, of course, was the fourth Doctor, as we all know, but he won the role of Doctor Who after producer Barry Letts was looking for a replacement for John Pertwee, who was leaving in the early 70s. He'd asked lots of people who either weren't available or weren't right for the part. And one wet Wednesday afternoon, he went into Leicester Square in London, where it's a sort of a trifecta of cinemas, and saw Sinbad, The Golden Voyage of Sinbad, and Tom Baker, of course, playing the villainous Prince Kura. And he had a light bulb moment and thought, British actor Tom Baker, perhaps he might be interested. And of course, the rest is TV history, as he was cast as, in most people's eyes, and mine included, the best Doctor.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Wow. You've just covered a lot there. Very, very interesting. And folks, you absolutely must see Mr. Walsh's vodcast series of videos, which he just mentioned. I have watched all of them in the last week, and they are absolutely excellent productions, as you might expect from a filmmaker. And what you need to do is go over to johnwalshfilmmaker.com. For those of you listening to this on audio, that is John Walsh, JohnWalsh, filmmaker, filmmaker.com, johnwalshfilmmaker.com. All excellent quality vodcast productions by John Walsh, including a recent interview with Ian Wheeler of the Doctor Who Appreciation Society. And from there, you will find a link to Titan Books to order any and all of these splendid publications. YouTube viewers, you will be able to find links to what we just discussed just down below here. Excuse me. Mr. Walsh, you are also an award-winning and double BAFTA and double Grierson nominated filmmaker, as well as the founder of Walsh Brothers Limited, one of the UK's top 100 production companies. I believe it would be a true statement to call you a massive success. Do you consider yourself to be a success story?
It's difficult, that, isn't it? Because where do you measure your success against? You know, we've just had the World Cup, and although I don't follow football, is that the ultimate measure of sports or of football? I guess perhaps in some people's eyes it must be, or it might be. I am pleased I've had the success I've had. You know, what you don't see for me is John Walsh, the Lost Movies, or John Walsh, the Unmade TV series, because all filmmakers who are always pitching ideas always have lots of projects that didn't get made, or enormous compromises, and it's rare that we talk about those things. But, you know, I'm happy with the way things went. You know, I was at film school very young, at 18, and when I left, I started pretty much producing and directing professionally when I was 20. And I looked, as you would have seen in that picture before, I looked like I was 14. So
you don't really look much older now.
It was very kind, with the help of an Apple computer and a ring light, and knowing exactly how to sit, having lit people for many years. It's very kind of you to say, Ian. But you know, I think success is it's really for other people to say. It's a bit like reviewing your own book. You can say, well, I did what I did. It's the book I wanted it to be, and it's up to the public to decide. But in the case of this book, I wanted it to be 2 books in one gatefold sleeve. And I said to Tyson Books, could we do 2, you know, with different covers for each of the films? And I have enough material, I think, to do 2 books. And of course, they would have been happy to do that, except it would have been enormously expensive. The risk would have been substantial. And one of the reasons there hasn't been a book like this before is because of the investment at their end. So it's all very well me saying I'd like a bigger book, I'd like more pages. It's important to be realistic. So I think I'm happy with the book, definitely. And I think in terms of happiness and success, there needs to be a balance, because I always feel there's more to achieve, but you need to be happy in what you're doing, because it can undermine your own success if you're constantly nitpicking and being an internal critic all the time. So, you know, take the wins when you get them, is what I say. So.
Okay, that's very interesting, because that really touches on my next question here. When interviewing actors, authors, artists, directors, and musicians, specifically in the worlds of Doctor Who here recently, I found a common trend which seems to affect everyone, and it's called rejection. For authors and actors in particular, it seems to be very common. And you have even noted in the description of your book, Harryhausen, The Lost Movies, and I will quote, "But for every film that reaches the big screen, half a dozen projects are never realized." Harryhausen, The Lost Movies, explores Harryhausen's unrealized films, including unused ideas, projects he turned down, and scenes that ended up on the cutting room floor. So I'm wondering what you might have in common with the other people that I've interviewed in this series when it comes to rejection. Have you pitched a book idea only to have it declined, or have you had a film project that just didn't turn out as you wished? And how did you deal with those?
So look, absolutely. The creative process, it was much harder when I started. When I was much younger, you would take rejection personally because you saw it as a personal rejection, when of course it wasn't. You know, and I learned this lesson that especially in television commissioning at the BBC as an example, and the BBC is a fine organization that makes good programs. I pitched a major series on homelessness to the BBC, and they rejected it because they said they weren't interested. There wasn't a place for it at the time. And I went around to other broadcasters and they liked it, but they didn't have a slot to give me. And it was an expensive show that was going to film for a year and a half. And it followed homeless people who were being retrained for the workplace. So it involved a lot of corporate clients as well, and a lot of behind the scenes at big companies. Anyway, the long story to a short story was I ended up pitching it back to the BBC just because that's where I started. And they said yes the minute they got it. And I was like, oh,
Wow.
So the commissioning process is such that as I'm not a commissioner, I'm only a pitcher. So I'm always the eager seller. And they're always, if you like, the suspicious buyer. That's the kind of the role I imagine for them. They're not remembering everything that's coming through because they're seeing maybe 10, 20 projects a day. And it wasn't the right time at that time. But guess what? It was the right time when I submitted it 6 or 8 months later. And it was a big success and everyone was happy. And I never discussed that with a commissioner. I never said, oh, but you turned this down. It wasn't about sharing shame. I was just glad that they commissioned it. And so the useful takeaway from that is that, yes, when they're turning it down, they're turning that project at that time in that schedule down. They're not saying you're a bad person or you shouldn't be working in TV. And it's the same for books. When people say no, it's often with regret because they cannot afford to take on this book. They don't have a place for it. They don't have maybe an editor who's available in their publishing house to take on something else. They can't afford the license because it's too much of an expensive book. They can't afford to pay me what I want. So a bit like lottery numbers, the numbers that win this week won't necessarily win next week. That doesn't mean they're not good numbers. You just have to wait for the right moment. And the trick is to stay positive and to also stay creative. You know, one of the big problems when I speak to groups of young people about pitching and what's the best foot forward, always look smart. I mean, today I made sure I had a smart shirt on, always look clean and tidy. Thank you very much. So never look as if you've just rolled out from under a doorway, because that's the first thing that will put a channel off, because whoever you're pitching to, it's a movie studio, a major TV network, or a publishing house, these are corporate entities. So you don't have to go in a top hat and a suit, but you do need to look smart, be smart, and be clever about how you speak and what you say. Once you've been invited in, you're more than halfway there. So I've often gone in to see a broadcast and they've said, look, the idea is not right for us right now, but actually, I'd like to see you again next week. Can you tell me more about these other projects you're working on, about disability hate crime, or about projects about history projects and so on? Come back and see me in a few days. Speak to my secretary, because I think I'd like to be in the John Walsh business, even if I'm not in that particular project you're pitching business. So being liked and being likable is more than 50%. And if you're not a nice person, fake it until you make it. You know, be a nice person in that meeting and don't talk too much, and never interrupt the commissioner, because they're in charge. They're effectively your boss, if you want to see them as that. And they want to tell you about their channel or about the position they want to put your program in. They'll have much more restrictions on what they can do than what you can pitch. So it's always about listening and reacting, not just waiting to speak, but reacting to what they're saying. We're nervous when we go into pitch. We're always anxious that, well, I'm anxious they'll say no, and I'm anxious they'll say yes, because once they say yes and they've pulled the commissioning lever, that's it. That's you for maybe 6 months or a year. So it's kind of temporarily life-changing. So there's a lot of nervous energy in the room. So don't speak too fast, don't interrupt, and just see where the journey takes you.
Wow, that is very enlightening, and you win. That is the best answer to that question that I have ever heard. And thank you very much for sharing that. this interview series is intended to educate people. It is for people looking at success in areas that they may be interested in. And that is an absolutely outstanding answer, Mr. Walsh. Thank you very much. That's absolutely excellent.
Thank you, Greg. And you
Now,
can call me John, of course. Everyone calls me John. And
John,
if they don't call me John, they call me something else. And
okay. Okay, John, thank you very much. That is really something I'm going to have to really ponder on what you just said, because it touches so many areas of creativity. And that is absolutely excellent. So when looking at your massive list of works on IMDb, the Internet Movie Database, dating all the way back to 1985, what would you consider film-wise to be a few works or experiences that you consider to be very dear to heart?
it's always tricky because TV folk always think about their first BAFTA nomination or their first big award win, or the first time they've kind of been recognized for what they do. My films have always had subject matter, so they've always been about other people, and I've given them a perspective by seeing them through my eye. And then there's been drama work, of course. But in 2010, I actually stood for Parliament, and it was a film focusing the camera on myself, by myself, with one assistant. And that kind of changed, if you like, the way in which I thought of commissioning a program. All of my other programs on IMDb have to some extent been pitches that I've made to third parties and said, please, can I make this? And it's been a pitch perhaps on paper with some follow-up videotape, and they've said yes. Tory Boy the movie, I kind of started it, and it wasn't self-financed. I had an interested party in a UK television news network, a major one, who said to me, go off and do this, and I'll pay you considerable money to do 2 films for us about being a candidate. So I was the candidate. And normally I would have filmed maybe a candidate or done a film about the political process, but I thought, what the hell? If I'm actually the candidate, I'm really am the insider, and let's see how this really works, because I was dubious as to whether or not I could even get in. And they took me, and it was like, this is crazy. I have 0 experience and potentially 0 interest in politics, and yet I'm straight in to a general election for the leading Conservative Party, who ended up forming the government. So I could have ended up being part of the government. So the film I was making was going to be about, if you like, the process. And if you're a kind of a politics or a news geek like I am, and effectively Doctor Who and the Daleks is part of that, it's film history. So it's partly news, albeit very old news. So I stood for Parliament with the intention of looking at the mechanics of it and the craziness of how someone like me could just get into a blue suit with a gold tie and be a candidate. But in fact, I uncovered something else, which was far more rotten in this constituency, where there was lots of corruption going on. So instead of making 2 10 or 15-minute films for a news report, I ended up making a feature documentary that had a cinema release in 2011 throughout the UK, was re-released again during the next election in 2015, was put on Prime Video by me during lockdown, and became one of the most watched politics documentaries on Prime. And it was so successful that the folks down at Prime Studios have asked me to consider doing a sequel, which I don't quite know how I would do that. Yes. Wow. And I'm like, very flattering. I'm not sure I can still get back into that suit. But I tried. I got back into that suit just a few weeks ago. And I was like, oh, the suit still fits. Maybe I should do it.
So, wow. Okay. John, thank you very much for covering that. I was aware of it. And you made me a little bit nervous, I have to admit, because I was thinking, okay, I'm going to interview this gentleman on his new Doctor Who book, but wait a second, what does this say? He stood for Parliament. Okay. and then of course you add to that you're a BAFTA nominee. I mean, you're a very fascinating gentleman. And thank you for answering something that I wasn't quite sure how to ask, and it's an extremely interesting thing to look at there. Now let's go ahead and go back to the book here, Doctor Who and the Daleks, the official story of the films. I guess it goes without saying that you must obviously be a fan of Doctor Who. Do you recall when you first started watching Doctor Who, and who is your doctor?
I remember seeing John Pertwee, but my doctor is definitely Tom Baker.
Mhm.
I like all the doctors, and it's kind of hard to. It's like choosing a favorite child. Someone once described, but I do like all the doctors. For me, Tom Baker. Even now, when I look back at the Blu-ray releases, his stories are strong. He is strong, and it was a great time for British television. But look, Doctor Who has had many forms. He's come back in many guises. When the Doctor Who book, when the Doctor Who films were made, there hadn't been a second Doctor. So Peter Cushing didn't know that he could be an alternative Doctor. So he did a version of the first Doctor that was more family friendly. So in terms of the different guises of the Doctor, if Peter Cushing had only waited another 12 months and saw that Patrick Troughton turned up in November 66, then he would have been like, perhaps I can be like a third, fourth, or some other version of this time traveler. So,
Okay.
I've been a fan of all the Doctors, but it's a particular soft spot for Peter Cushing.
Okay, very good. Last night I stayed up waiting for that email from Amazon for my digital copy to be delivered, and then all of a sudden, ding, there it was, and it was very exciting. And the way that I feel from what I have seen of the book so far is it made me feel as if I had just opened a new adventure in Doctor Who that was also educational. As I told you, it felt as if it took me back to the 1960s when the films were being produced. But one thing that occurred to me is this is a literary documentary on the history of British film cultural history. I hope that's the right way of putting it. And I personally believe that this is the ultimate background of the behind the scenes of these movies. To me, it feels as if it's a piece of Doctor Who history that has been missing, and it should have already existed. And I don't believe it's ever going to be outdone, because it can't. This cannot be outdone in any way, shape, or form. Now, am I just being too excited about this, or am I correct?
No, you're correct. No, look, we're excited because we're Doctor Who fans. We've had a long time to wait, but the downside of that is because people have waited nearly 60 years for this book. Has it been worth that wait? And for me, I've put in not every single photo I've found and not every single bit of information, but the most pertinent information that works best for the limitations of what is a 160-page book. I would like it to have been bigger. I'd like to have got more photos in. I'm hoping to share some of them online on the official Facebook page for the book and on my Twitter feed and so on. But look, I set out to write something that was definitive, knowing that no one else is allowed to write it outside of Studio Canal. You'd need their permission. But there's been a reason why the book didn't happen before, and it's this. Doctor Who for television is owned outright by BBC Television. This Doctor Who isn't. So it's not a BBC licensed product. So Studio Canal, who owns the film, is entitled to put the film on VHS and Betamax, which has happened in the past, and DVD and Blu-ray and now 4K disc. Any format that's like a home video, or to sell it to a network to show it on television or put it in cinemas. But to create other merchandise and other sort of IP opportunities using that title, those characters and so on, has been much more difficult over the years. So Titan Books got the BBC and Studio Canal together so that we could all agree that I should be the person to do it, and this should be the form in which it should take. And as you look through the book, you'll find that William Hartnell and Peter Cushing are on the same page. And it's never happened before.
Yes.
It's never been allowed before. And yes, Doctor Who magazines and some other magazines have done so, but that hasn't been a officially licensed Studio Canal product about this movie with the BBC's involvement. That's a first. And so it's wonderful to have pictures of William Hartnell in there that have been fully restored and colorized, and to put that story straight as to why Peter Cushing did an impersonation, if you will, of the first Doctor, the story of the BBC, their involvement and so on. It's all here. But it's great to do something which, you know, people are telling me is definitive. You've asked me if am I successful? Well, it's for people to tell me, you know. There are great films that need movie books that weren't successful when they came out, but people still love them. You know, Howard the Duck is one that springs to mind. Even now, people go, "Oh, Howard the Duck." But there's some great stuff in that film. It's had a 4K release by Universal Pictures. On a very, very, very long list. It might be on there for me to write that book. I've spoken to Phil Tippett, who was the animator who did all the fabulous FX on that. So how do you measure success? Is it when the book comes out, or when the film comes out, or is it what people say at the time, or 10 years later? So there are lots of projects which are failures in their own time that have later been considered great successes. Look at David Lynch's version of Dune. That is superb. There are so many fans of that. I went to a screening in London about 3 or 4 years ago, a 70mm screening, and it was about a 500-seater theatre, completely sold out. So I hope this is a definitive book. You know, if somebody else comes along in a few years' time and tries to do another one, I'll be surprised.
No.
But who knows?
No, I don't think it's possible. I don't think it's possible. Now, this, in fact, I'm sure it's not possible. And yes, you are a success. Absolutely. Now, on that area of thought, if I were to claim that you have massively contributed not only to Doctor Who history, yet to British cultural history in film with Doctor Who and the Daleks, the story of the films, would you dispute that statement?
No, but I'd say what it is. I've added a small sliver to the film history of the UK. You know, when I look at these films, I separate the fact that I'm a Doctor Who fan and a Dalek fan with the fact that I'm as fascinated by the processes of filmmaking as I was when I first started at film school. And this is the photochemical world, where everything had to be done on the film, or more or less kind of animated or scratched onto the film later on. And so some of these processes aren't fully understood. How the special effects happened, the processes people had to go through, the restrictions and limitations of the techniques, I think is important to document. And, you know, with Ray Harryhausen, he hadn't recorded commentaries for most of his films. So one of the first things I did when I realized that back in 2011, I think it was I got one of my own crew that I was filming with into Ray's house, and we started filming and recording in high quality sound commentaries for all of his films, working from Clash of the Titans back. And of course, that's really essential oral history. Who better to hear it from than Ray Harryhausen? The techniques, the problems, the limitations of time and money, and the restrictions of the studio, what they'd allow you to do. He could only make family films. He could only make them for this amount of money. You know, they had to do it in these locations because of laboratory costs were so expensive in America and so on. These are the sorts of pieces of information that would be lost. As Rutger Hauer says at the end of Blade Runner, like tears in rain. But people might say, well, what does it matter? We don't do it the old-fashioned way. We don't use laboratories. It's not a photochemical process. Who cares? You know, it's like, well, it's part of our history. It dictates who we are today and where we got to. So you could say, well, who cares about the cavemen and the Jurassic period? Because the dinosaurs are not around anymore except on the big screen. So who cares? It is important because the working practices of people who came before are the shoulders that we're standing on today. So it is essential that even if you don't recognize that somewhere someone has written a book to say, look, for those who are interested, and in some ways perhaps did it better. You know, we look at older films like King Kong and Casablanca and Citizen Kane. Have these films been bettered? And many people would argue no. And in fact, lots of people have stood on the shoulders of those films to build careers for themselves. And, you know, Ray Harryhausen had great fans. Young people who were in the cinema watching The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad included Dennis Muren and Phil Tippett, who set up Industrial Light and Magic with George Lucas, who's also a fan, Steven Spielberg, Peter Jackson, Jim Cameron. They've all spoken to us about their love of Harryhausen films. In my book, Harryhausen, The Lost Movies, because I was thinking, who am I going to get to write the foreword for this about films unmade and so on? I asked filmmakers I knew. And so the foreword is a combination of really pretty sad laments from directors like John Borman, John Landis, Guillermo del Toro, Nicholas Meyer, who directed Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, Mike Hodges, who directed Flash Gordon. These are all people I knew, and I asked them to contribute because of their love of the Harryhausen universe. They realized that it was Ray Harryhausen and his work that got them into cinema. George Lucas, on the day that Ray died, said there would likely have been no Star Wars without Ray Harryhausen.
Really?
Yep. So today's filmmakers recognize the legacy and the footprint that great filmmakers like Ray Harryhausen left. Here, Milton Subotsky, who was an American who came to the UK, created both Doctor Who films in his own vision. He was the person who got them onto the big screen. No producer has done that since, and yet people don't know the name of Milton Subotsky. Milton wasn't a flash in the pan. He had lots of successful horror films. He was the first person ever to option a new young writer of horror called Stephen King.
Oh.
Milton Subotsky did that. He was the first, and yet we don't speak about Milton Subotsky in these terms. He had some considerable successes. He was one of the first Americans to come and work with all the British technicians and so on. People like to think it was George Lucas and Steven Spielberg who did that, but it wasn't. Filmmakers like Harryhausen and Subotsky were already there. They were already there doing this in the 50s and 60s. So it really helps redress a balance and right a wrong, if you will, because there are many unsung heroes in the back room of filmmaking. And in Doctor Who and the Daleks, the end title roller is really short. You'd think that only a dozen people worked on the picture. So many people weren't credited. So many people were forgotten in the short-term history. And I hope that this book puts it right. We talk about the matte paintings, the music, the special effects, the editing. It's a type of working and a workflow practice that people need to recognize went before what they're doing now. And I think it does inform what we do today. I mean, we look to the past often as a warning about what we should and shouldn't do, but also to inspire what we're doing. And Hollywood has never had so many remakes. An animated film from a live action, or a live action from an animated film, we are always looking to the past. Everything that is old is now new again. So,
well, that is extremely interesting, and you just educated me as to who you are and why you wrote this book, and that is going to add to my enjoyment as I read it today. That's an absolutely excellent description, and I'm detecting something here. You don't like things being lost from history, and if there's something that you can do to prevent it, you're going to. Now, with the Doctor Who missing episodes, particularly from the Patrick Troughton era, do you think that we're ever going to see any more of those?
I think we might. One of the big questions I have for studios and archives is pre-1975, the trims on negatives for movies weren't kept. They were either disposed of or recycled. So that means the rushes footage. So when a film gets locked and it's a final print, the original dub, which is done on 35mm mag track, and the original cut negative are the two things that are kept and retained. Everything else is kind of discarded. So the BBC and the history of the films being transcribed and going to foreign territories is the way that we found these various prints. Now, there is a problem, and it's this. If you had an overdue library book from 1966, okay, and the library police, were coming around, a bit like on Seinfeld, the library detective is coming around to your house to say, Greg, you've had the book here perhaps since 1966. The fees and charges on it would be enormous, yeah? Well, when the BBC used to send out these telecordings, these 16mm black and white telecordings to different territories, it came with either a return notice or a destroy notice. So if they kept them and kept showing them, they would have to pay for that. I've had it with my own programs. If they get repeated more times than they've been relicensed for, then you can keep sending invoices in. It's something producers love to do. I'm great at invoices, not so good at credit notes. So I suspect with some territories, they're concerned that they have these prints and they don't want to necessarily give them up to the BBC in case there's a large fine to be had. And I think people like Philip Morris, who went and found recent Doctor Who's, did a great job. Whether there's many more to be found, I'm not sure. I do hope so. Private collectors, of course, have deep archives. There's something nice about having your own private copy of something. And once you share it back with the world, it's not necessarily as unique a property as having it yourself. But Ray Harryhausen, he kept everything because he was a child of the Great Depression. So he was born in the 30s. And
I'm sorry, you just broke up
he
just a little bit there. Sorry, John, you just broke up there a little bit. You were... So
that's okay. So
John, hang on just a second. Okay. Yeah, the Zoom actually locked up a little bit there. The last thing you were saying was that Harry was a product of the 1930s.
He was 13 when King Kong came out in 1930, and he kept everything. He was a lifelong hoarder, if you will, we'd call it today. And I'm not dissimilar to that. I didn't grow up in the 1930s, but I try and hold on to things. I try and preserve things. And just in terms of digital environments, I make sure that I have cloud storage and Dropbox and these sorts of things to make sure I keep safety copies of everything, because even for my own programs, I've been contacted by broadcasters 6 or 8 months down the line who want to repeat something and they can't find my program. So I have to sort of give them a master tape for my collection. So a lot of it isn't to do with the passage of time. A lot of it's to do with the people you surround yourself with.
Okay. Now, do you recall when you first watched the 1965 and 1966 Dalek movies with Peter Cushing?
I think I would have first seen the Dalek films on television, probably Saturday morning BBC television in the 80s. And I was first struck by, what's that music? And what's that TARDIS doing? This isn't Doctor Who. And I was well aware that, there'd been different doctors, but the music was kind of mostly similar by this point. It had a bit of a disco vibe by the 80s. But the TARDIS, the interior had been sort of slightly upgraded, but it was not this. This looked like the inside of a transistor radio. And I was like, why? Why is it like that? Of course, we find out in here why it's like that. And the same for the second film, which kind of had the swirly title sequence, a bit more like Doctor Who, but the music again wasn't anything like Doctor Who. So, and the someone had pimped up the Daleks. They were taller and they had more skirting on them, and they looked kind of harder to move around. So I was very aware that it was very different, but the reasons for why it was that different weren't that apparent. And there was a lot of fan speculation. And of course, things have been written over the years about it, some of which was accurate and some wasn't. So it was nice to get that straightened out. But color was the big issue. Who in color, the Daleks in color and Daleks were the selling points. And we cover that in the book, not to give too many spoilers.
Okay.
Peter Cushing.
Just 1 second, John.
Famous, and yet on the original poster for the original film, he's really small.
Okay. Hang on just a second here. Let's let Zoom catch up.
Sure.
It got a little bit of a buffering issue there. Pimped up Daleks. I have never heard that term before. That is great. Now the Doctor Who and the Daleks 4K was just released this summer. Have you perhaps researched the restoration project of that?
Yes, so I did. When I did the Studio Canal asked me to do a 4K unboxing video because it includes a sort of mini version of my book inside, and it's only a mini sort of preview. It's only like 2 or 3 pages showing some of the things that are coming soon. Yeah, I know the companies that were involved with the restoration and how they went back to the original Technoscope negative and did a lot of repair work and a lot of restoration. And the great thing is that Canal have such deep archives that they've retained everything. So it really was a sort of a root and branch, as they call it, restoration. So it's never looked better. Of course, the worry is when a film this old has a full restoration, you might start to see the strings on the flying saucers, and it might start to reveal some of the low budget aspirations of the set. But I think it really helped the film sparkle. It looks wonderful.
Okay. And then, of course, inside of this box set, there is a mini book preview of Doctor Who and the Daleks, the official story of the films.
There is, yeah, not with this cover though. We made sure of that.
Oh, okay. So
because
it didn't leak the cover.
no, I mean, although this is old artwork, this is created by an artist called Tom Chantrell, who created the first Star Wars poster. So the first Star Wars poster for the first film, which is by most people's measure and mine, the best Star Wars poster. And it's that fabulous one of Luke Skywalker in the center pointing, and it's look up Tom Chantrell Star Wars and you go, oh yeah, he's right, it is the best one. Well, Tom Chantrell was invited to create this artwork for, strangely, the home video release in the very early 1980s. And it redresses a balance, an imbalance, if you like, from the original posters, where Peter Cushing is so small on the movie posters for films 1 and 2, you can't see him at all. Whereas on this version, it puts him right at the center. And of course, it's the right format for the book. And we've had this slightly restored as well to make it a bit more vibrant. And on the print version, Greg, the actual words Doctor Who and the Daleks are raised, they're embossed. And so it's nice to the touch.
Okay, so that's I'm going to see that when my hardcover arrives. Amazon, yes. I don't believe I need to check my email today to see if they've given me a delivery date on it yet. Since it has been released, I don't know that they've shipped it yet, but I can't wait to have that in my hand and feel the cover. Now, do you happen to know if there are plans to restore the 1966 film Daleks Invasion Earth 2150 AD into 4K as well?
Oh yeah, that was released as well. So both films had a simultaneous release, a separate edition. So normally they appear in the same box sets. That controversially appeared in separate box sets, and they were quite expensive because the restoration process was very expensive. So both films have had the full royal treatment, so they're fully sparkling.
Okay, perfect. Now, when did this idea first come to you to do Doctor Who and the Daleks, the official story of the films, and approximately how long did the project take?
I've always wanted someone else to write this book so I could read it, and because no one else wrote it, I had to, so I could read it. So I've always wanted to write this book, but then there's a big list of things I've always wanted to do, and there's a big list of books I want other people to write that I can read, or I'll have to write them myself. So I suppose since 2019, I've been speaking to, or 2018, been speaking to Tyson Books about it. They were unsure if it was going to be commercially viable. And they were also unsure whether we'd have the photo assets to justify making a very expensive, large coffee table art book format. So it's really a discussion that went back and forth. And because the rights holder, Studio Canal, I was working with on Escape from New York and Flash Gordon, they felt it was now is the right time. We're doing a restoration this year. Let's get John Walsh involved. And I was like, yeah, well, I am involved because I've been saying it since 2018. Let's do it. But it's a very good fit. We thought the book would be out in time for the 4K restoration. It wasn't. Partly due to when lockdown was lifted, how books are transported to and fro. The publisher is not as big a fish as Studio Canal. But that said, the delay actually allowed me to put more things in, and we managed to find more gems. So if you've got the 4K box set, I'm sorry to say you haven't seen everything. You need to get this because there is so much more in the book.
So this is the missing piece of the puzzle for that collection. That's exactly how it felt to me this morning when reading it. Now, obviously, you dug deeply, deeply into archives, and you have created the ultimate story of these films in a way that will never be outdone. When going through these archives, did you kind of feel like a kid in a candy store?
Yes, I mean, it's knowing which pictures have been reproduced before. When you come across them, you think, oh, great. And you have this dilemma. Do you show the best pictures that people have seen before, or do you show pictures people haven't seen before, but they're not quite as good, but they haven't been seen before? So it's a constant sort of editorial question I ask myself: is this right for the book, for the fans, or right for the book for everyone who's reading it? And then the third dilemma was, we found pictures that had been seen before, but that had been cropped and were not very good quality before. And we found the originals and we're showing them in their full frame and in much, much better quality. It's like a 4K book because the photos are in such good quality. So my dilemma was, what pictures help me tell the story best? And it was tough, because I really would have liked more pages and more pictures full page. I identified fairly early on which were the crown jewel pictures that were either in full color or restored or hadn't been seen before. But it was like Sophie's Choice.
I'm sorry. What was that?
What you leave behind, what you leave in, what you leave out. It was like Sophie's Choice. You can't decide which ones to include, which ones to leave out. And it was tough. I think if I wasn't such a big fan, I could have said, yeah, that'll do. Or we've got plenty of pictures of him, and we've got plenty of pictures of Daleks. That'll do. But when you're a fan, every single picture in every single page, and which picture is it going to be opposite? The layout then becomes a not a big issue, but it becomes so dominant in the book that it can slow the process down if you're not careful.
Okay. Now, that's interesting you should say that, because what I noticed this morning with those pictures, I was paying attention to how the format was laid out and which ones were selected to go next to each other. And in addition to it being the most comprehensive history and documentary of these movies that has ever been made or ever will, it's also really simple to read at the same time. I don't know exactly how long it would take for someone to consume this entire book in one setting. A good couple of hours, I'm sure, but it is something that can be read over a period of time due to the simple layout. So on the layout there, you absolutely nailed it, at least for me, of what I like reading. It's very educational, yet it's also relaxing to be educated on these at the same time. And the pictures and the layouts are absolutely outstanding. And it's one of the funnest Doctor Who books that I've ever read, and I cannot wait to be able to fully consume it, which I will be doing later today. So, you know what, we've been going about an hour here, so let's go ahead and wrap it up. I have just a couple of more questions here. One of them is, do you find it odd that one of the most famous actors to ever play the role of Doctor Who, and I'm not saying the Doctor, one of the most famous actors ever, Peter Cushing, is sort of relegated by some to be a non-canon Doctor? Shouldn't he at least be Doctor 1.5?
Look, I spoke to Stephen Moffat about this. We were in a green room after a screening at the BFI of a Doctor Who, and we used to regularly bump into each other there. And I said to him, look, I'm doing this book, and he said to me that he tried to get Peter Cushing into the 50th anniversary Doctor Who. He wanted to kind of have him there in a form of a CGI version. And of course, it wouldn't have been the first time that Peter Cushing has come back in CG, as Governor Tarkin, of course, in Rogue One, we saw him there. And it, of course, was an issue between the rights holder, Studio Canal, and the BBC. And I think there was a time factor as well. But he likes, Stephen Moffat is a showrunner of recent times. He's canon, Stephen Moffat. So, he likes the Doctor so much that he had the interior TARDIS doors white during some of Matt Smith's reign as the Doctor Who, as the Doctor. From the Doctor Who TARDIS from the movies. So, I think people like Stephen Moffat try to embrace the Peter Cushing Doctor Who. I think the difficulty for fans is that Peter Cushing's Doctor is a human who on Earth in his spare time with his granddaughter built a time machine. So he's not an escaped time traveler from Gallifrey who stole a TARDIS and is hiding on Earth, which is really exciting and dramatic. So, because of the liberties taken, I think at that stage, I think people have kind of turned their backs on it. Had he been a Time Lord in another guise, or if he'd revealed in the second film, look, I lied, I've got two hearts, I'm actually a Time Lord, and I'm hiding here in future Earth with the Sugar Puff commercials. But that wasn't to be, and I think for some people he'll never be the official Doctor. But I think because of the Blu-ray sets the BBC have brought out that have restored classic Doctor Who, I think Studio Canal have bounced onto that wave with their 4K restorations, which have pretty much now sold out. And I'm sure that's helped this book. People are looking back at classic Doctor Who. And because we have new Doctor Who now with the Russell T Davies years and other years, Steve Mossett and so on, old Doctor Who classic Doctor Who, I should say, has tended to have been sealed up as classic Doctor Who. And I think Peter Cushing is, in many people's eyes, is part of that seal. So he's in there now. So we've had very little negative. I've had no negative comments about the book in terms of him not being the right Doctor. I think people just accept those films exist. It's either better to have them or better to not have them. Well, it's better to have them with perceived faults and all. So better we have them. There's lots of films I'd like to not have in this universe, and Doctor Who and the Daleks and Dalek Invasion Earth aren't two of them.
Right. Okay. Well, I think that people that want to read that this year here in the U.S., they probably should go to Amazon or their bookseller of choice and order it immediately, because I think it's going to sell out. I'm glad I already got my pre-order in. And I can, like I said, I hate to keep repeating this, I cannot wait to be able to read this in depth this afternoon with my digital version. So for anyone that may watch this interview in the future, be it a young kid with a dream of becoming an author like yourself, or an older person that's dreaming of becoming an actor or a film producer, to people that may look to you for reference of success, which you obviously are, and reference the path to get there, what is the best advice that you could give them?
Well, if you're a filmmaker or you're pitching a book, and to be honest, for me, it's the same. And the reasons my books are, if you like, a simpler read is I immediately take myself out of the conversation. I'm not constantly referring back to me when I saw the films. It's not about me. It's about Milton Subotsky first, in my mind, Milton first, then the cast, and then the other people who were involved. So I'm reporting on his story as if I'm a journalist visiting. So I remove myself completely. I don't want it to be about me. There's a picture of me on the back. I wrote the introduction. That's enough of me. I wasn't involved with these films. Having something to say, I think, is key. And here I'm redressing the balance because the films didn't get their fair share. If you're pitching to a network and you have an idea, have something to say. Because if you don't, and you're just aping the last project, anyone can do that. Anyone can make a program similar to what's already on. You need to be distinctive and have your own creative voice. And if you're not sure what that voice is, then go off and have a think about what you like. If you don't like doing it, you won't do your best work. So find the thing you most like to talk about and work about, and that will be your best work. And it might be a while to find someone who'll agree like that. But if I wasn't interested in this and I didn't know one Dalek from another, and I can spot one frame from each of the film and know which film it was and which scene. If someone came on board who didn't know the films or had only watched them once, the book wouldn't have felt as invested. And you need to be invested. But the problem with being invested is that when you get the slap of rejection, it really hurts. So it's about having a kind of a work-life balance. Yes, be ready to be slapped down and be told no. But then pick yourself up, because the same publisher or the same broadcaster might say yes in a few weeks' time. And just on a note on you said about the book doing well, it's sold out here in the UK, but people who came to my book signing a couple of weeks ago, we ring-fenced 200 books and they all went. But for those folks who order them online, we have signed book plates that we can send and bookmarks.
Oh,
So
nice.
if people contact me, they'll find my social media stuff online. If they contact me, we have a few of these left, and they have to just send me a screenshot of their Amazon review. Obviously, keep it nice, keep it
Right.
PG, and at my expense, you'll be sent these. It doesn't matter where in the world you are, you'll get a copy of a signed copy of these while stocks last.
Excellent. Now, if we write a review and we refer to the Daleks as being pimped up, is that considered PG?
I think it is. I think it's
Okay.
like it's an MTV reference, isn't it? Pimp up my ride. So pimp up my Dalek.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, and now your love for these films can be seen in this book, and it's my understanding that when you're doing something intending to be successful, it really needs to be something that you love. And this goes into our next and probably final question here. I'm guessing that your film productions and your books with your company, Walsh Brothers, may be a fully engrossing endeavor for you, something you love, perhaps something that consumes all of your time and energy. I'm just guessing there. Do you have any other hobbies or interests personally? Are you perhaps a skydiver, a chef, an activist of some sort, or a stamp collector?
No, unfortunately, as much as I say to people, the advice is try and have a work-life balance and do something else. Unfortunately, my hobby of making films when I was at school and being an avid reader of books about films and cinema has become my profession. So it's still my hobby as well. I will read books that friends and colleagues have written about classic cinema, and I'll watch lots of films. Of course, I'm a voting member of BAFTA, so this time of year there's about 200 or 300 films to watch for voting as well. So I go to screenings and so on, and I go to my own projects, book signings and talks and so on. But I don't have much interest outside of film and TV and the worlds of Ray Harryhausen. But my kind of film work, which is around social justice and documentaries and historical feature film and politics, is quite different to my interest in the Harryhausen Foundation. So I think within that specialist field, I've found the right balance, which is right for me, I think.
Okay. Okay. Very good. So it is all consuming pretty much. Now, did you happen to watch Rose live when it aired in 2005?
Oh yes, I did. That was absolutely wonderful with Billy Piper and Chris Eccleston. So it was amazing to see the Doctor back. And I'm always anxious when the Doctor comes back in some other form, because I'm anxious for the Doctor that it will be a success. And you could feel there's an awful lot of positive energy around that, and it felt right from the very first frame.
Okay, very good. Now, I'm wondering, how do you feel about the current state of Doctor Who? Russell T Davies is back, coined RTD2 by fans. David Tennant appears to be the 14th Doctor. And then, of course, we have Ncuti Gatwa in the pipeline for the lead. Are you excited about the future of Doctor Who?
I am, yes. I mean, it's look, I'm excited that Doctor Who has a future, because I remember those days when the newspapers were talking Doctor Who down, when Colin Baker's Doctor was on and they were talking about how the ratings weren't as good because it had been moved around in the schedule. And then the Doctor had changed, and then they were talking that Doctor down, and then Paul McGann. And it was all about talking Doctor Who down, and it was depressing, and it used to make me anxious. It's great that we're talking about the future of Doctor Who, and the future is definitely rosy. It's definitely positive. These are brilliant actors. And now the production values, look, it gives Milton Subotsky a run for his money, because now they seem like feature films. And, you know, the last few seasons there with Jodie Whittaker, you could have put that in cinemas because it was really spectacular, and the widescreen adventure of it. And I've worked with one of the new Doctors. David Tennant narrated a program I made about disabled children learning martial arts called My Life Karate Kids. And David narrated that because he saw a rough cut of it. And we were BAFTA nominated for that. And it's worth having a look. It's a half-hour film there on my YouTube channel in full HD. And if you've ever worked with disabled children, or you know anyone in your family who's disabled, have a look at these children and see how much they've achieved. And I think, you know, all of the Doctors have other sort of lives outside of Doctor Who, and they do what they can to sort of help people around them. And I think that's a great positive thing about Doctor Who, whether it's the performers or the producers. Russell T Davies is such a nice guy. I've met him a few times. He's really tall. So, you know, it's great positive energy. And the fact that we can talk about the future of Doctor Who, wow. Imagine going back to late 1980s and saying that, the future of Doctor Who, you'd see a lot of glum faces.
Right. Wow. Okay. Very nice way of putting it. I did see the film you have mentioned where David Tennant narrated it. I saw that a couple of days ago. Speaking of tall, I've heard Russell T Davies is tall and Tom Baker is tall. Now, what was the piece where Tom Baker narrated for you?
It was called Ray Harryhausen, Movement into Life.
Okay.
And you can see an excerpt of that on my YouTube channel and on the Harryhausen channel. It's been fully restored in 4K, and we're hoping to include it in a new 4K release of Clash of the Titans that we're working on at the moment with Warner Brothers.
Okay. Wow. Okay. Folks, Doctor Who and the Daleks, the official story of the films, is out for order now in the UK and also in the US. It started shipping today from Amazon here in the States. Also, be sure to visit johnwalshfilmmaker.com and look at Mr. Walsh's other works in film, books, and his excellent quality vodcasts. To other YouTubers, if you want to see how to professionally do YouTube content, go and look at the Walsh Bros YouTube channel, and there's going to be a link below. Learn from a filmmaker, author, and a Doctor Who fan himself, Mr. John Walsh here. I honestly believe that Doctor Who and the Daleks, the official story of the films, is one of the most important Doctor Who publications of our lifetimes. And that's because it's a book that I believe should be the cornerstone of any complete Doctor Who collection. Wait until you read it and you'll understand why. It is something that should be proudly sitting on your living room, coffee, or tea table. John, thank you kindly for your time today. Was there anything that I did not ask that you would care to answer, or do you have a closing statement?
No, just thanks to everyone who's bought the book or who's pre-ordered the book. As I say, if you want to contact me, you can find me at my social media links. You can contact me on any of those links when you find them. Google John Walsh Filmmaker, they'll all come up. And I'm happy to send out these book plates and bookmarks whilst I have them. Keep reading, keep buying the books. And and also my other books. I create vodcast series for all of them. So for Flash Gordon, Escape from New York, for Harryhausen, and in future for Conan as well, you'll find kind of vodcast series where I go into more depth with people I've interviewed and show maybe some more images and sounds and clips from the films.
Very good. And I might add that the quality of those vodcasts is absolutely excellent. And that URL would be johnwalshfilmmaker.com. Thank you very much, John. I appreciate it. And I wish you a nice evening here, and cheers from California.
Thanks very much, and happy reading and happy holidays.
The same to you. Take care.
Bye now.